My parents left me alone in the ICU so they wouldn't miss my brother's birthday. I thought I was just a burden until the police showed up and told me I was a kidnapped child from 30 years ago. Then a billionaire walked in, knelt beside me, and said, "The moment my own parents hung up on me, refusing to help after an accident nearly cost me my arm, was the moment I unknowingly stepped into a truth so dark, so twisted, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my entire life. It turns out, the family I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love from, they weren't even my family at all. My entire existence was a lie. Hey everyone, my name is Wyatt Dempsey. And, honestly, I'm not usually one to spill my guts like this, but if you're listening, then you probably want to hear my story. Over the past couple of years, I've learned something profound. Sometimes, the absolute worst things happen, not to break you, but to slap you with the truth, no matter how much it stings. For me, this whole insane journey started on a freezing, rainy afternoon in Rockford, Illinois. Everything I knew, everything I was, just shattered. I lived in this tiny, beat-up apartment on the south side of town. You know, the kind of place with peeling paint and streets that swallow your tires. It was nothing special, just a living room that doubled as a hallway, a kitchen corner that always felt greasy, and a bed shoved right up against a window that looked out onto the highway. Every morning, like clockwork, I was up at 5 a.m. I'd pull on my work clothes, put on my hard hat, and drive my rusty old truck to Rockford Metal Works. I was a machinist there, operating the steel press, making sure everything ran smooth. I never complained. Never caused trouble. Always stayed late. My coworkers just called me quiet because, well, I only spoke when I absolutely had to. Work was my escape, my way to keep my mind from wandering to things I didn't want to think about, like my family, or at least, what I thought was my family. My paycheck barely covered rent, gas, and a few basics. Every extra penny? Sent straight to my parents in Beloit, Wisconsin, about an hour away. My dad, Carl Dempsey, was this rigid, cold man. 63, a retired supervisor, living in a house with a perfect picket fence. His favorite line? "A man has to pull himself up. Don't expect help from anyone." I heard that since I was a kid. It taught me not to ask for anything ever. But deep down, I always wondered if he ever saw me as his son, or just a debt. My mom, Lorraine, was 59. Ran a small home goods store. Everyone in town adored her, called her kind, bright, capable. But to me, she was a walking enigma. When I visited, she'd ask polite questions, but her eyes, they always made me feel like I owed her something, like my very existence was just this heavy burden she had to carry. I didn't blame her. I just tried harder, hoping one day that weight would lift from her gaze. And then there was Cole, my younger brother. 3 years my junior. Cole was the kind of person who demanded attention, tall, loud, always laughing, and always spending money like it was water. He couldn't hold a job for more than 3 months, but my parents? They absolutely adored him. Cole wanted a new car? Dad would sign the check. Gambling debt? Mom would quietly pay it off. Me? I was still driving the same beat-up truck from high school. Every penny I earned went into keeping my own life from just falling apart. Our family was a strange picture, you know? Nothing ever felt fair. I can still picture those family dinners. Cole would be rambling on about some half-baked business idea, and my parents would just beam, nodding and praising him like he'd invented the wheel. Me? I could talk about busting my butt, working overtime for a month to fix a machine at the factory, and my dad would just give this half-hearted nod. My mom? She'd glance at me with a look that just screamed, "What's that supposed to prove?" So I learned to stay quiet. I'd swallow my words, just praying the meal would end so I could disappear back to my room. I'm not usually one to complain, but that favoritism, it carved into me, day after day, like a slow, dull knife. I used to think if I just tried hard enough, worked harder, was better, then maybe they'd finally see me. But the older I got, the more I realized it didn't matter what I did. I was just a faint shadow in their eyes. Cole? He was the sun, and I was just there, filling the background. That afternoon, the rain was relentless, hammering against the factory's tin roof. a drumming sound that somehow drowned out the roar of the machines. It was my last shift, and I was checking this old steel press that had been acting up all week. My coworker, Jimmy, yelled something over the din. "Done checking yet? Shift's almost over." I nodded, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and leaned in. Something felt off. A steel rod was jammed, making the whole machine shudder. I reached in, just for a second, thinking I could dislodge it. Then, crack. It was like the world exploded. The machine roared back to life, that steel shaft spinning at a terrifying speed. I barely had time to scream. It felt like my right arm was just being devoured. The pain was so intense I couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. I crumpled to the floor, blood gushing, pooling red on the cold concrete. I heard my coworker's shouts, somewhere far away, but everything faded into this deep, nightmarish abyss. When I finally opened my eyes, blinding white lights seared my vision. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose, and there was this steady, rhythmic beeping. I was in a hospital bed, my body heavy, my right arm numb, wrapped tight in white bandages. A doctor stood over me, his face serious, but his voice gentle. "You're awake, Wyatt. Serious accident. Your right arm is badly fractured, nerve and muscle damage. Without surgery, soon, you could lose the ability to use it for a long time." I heard him, but it barely registered. My mind was fixated on one thing: how much will it cost? The doctor hesitated, didn't answer directly. Just told me to focus on recovery. I forced a weak smile, but inside, my entire world was crumbling. My cast-bound arm throbbed, a constant, agonizing reminder that every second brought me closer to losing my ability to work. Losing the one thing that kept my life from absolutely shattering. Staring up at those harsh fluorescent lights, I closed my eyes, trying to block out the searing pain and the fear that was clawing its way up my throat. No good insurance. No savings. All I had was that old truck, that crappy apartment, and Carl and Lorraine Dempsey. My parents. My only hope. Despite years of feeling like a total outsider in my own family, I truly believed that now, with my arm nearly crushed, they wouldn't just abandon me. Taking a shaky breath, I reached for the phone. Every movement made me grit my teeth, but I ignored it. I dialed the house in Voight. Each slow, drawn-out ring pulled me deeper into this pit of dread. My mother answered. Her voice was soft, yeah, but it was so cold, like she was talking to some random bank clerk, not her son. "Wyatt, what's wrong?" I tried to keep my voice steady, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Mama, I had an accident at the factory. My arm, it's really bad. The surgery costs a fortune. I need help." I paused, waiting for a question. A word of comfort. Anything to show she cared. But there was just this agonizing silence. Then she spoke, her voice flat, emotionless. "I'll talk to your father. Wait for us to get back to you." And then, she just hung up. "No, are you in pain? No, are you okay?" Nothing. I clutched the phone, staring at its dark, lifeless screen. "Get back to you." The words echoed in my head, fragile as a promise I knew deep down would never be kept. But I waited. I kept telling myself they'd call back. Maybe they were figuring out the money. Maybe they were already driving here. I pictured my mom, walking into my hospital room, taking my hand. My dad, patting my shoulder, saying everything would be all right. I clung to that image, even though I knew, deep down, it was a dream I no longer had the faith to chase. Hours crawled by. 1. Then 2. The phone stayed silent. I just stared out the window, raindrops blurring the glass, just like my thoughts. The hospital room was freezing, filled only with that relentless heart monitor beep and the faint shuffle of nurses' footsteps. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that steel press, spinning wildly, felt the screech, the pain. I jolt awake, gasping, sweat slicking my forehead, then look at the phone again, praying for it to light up. The next morning? Still nothing. I tried to tell myself they were busy. My dad hated being bothered. My mom always had a million things to do at the store. But as the sun climbed higher, harsh light streaming through the window, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I dialed my father's number, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. It rang 3 times before he picked up. Wyatt. His voice was gruff, that familiar irritation I'd known my whole life. What is it? I repeated my story, trying to keep my voice from cracking. Dad, I had an accident. My arm's badly hurt. I can't afford the bills. I need you and Mom to help. I paused, desperate. His response came quicker than I expected, sharp and cold as a razor blade. Don't bother us. We're too old to help. And then he hung up. No explanation. No hesitation. Just gone. I stared at the phone in my hand, its black screen swallowing the last, tiny shred of hope I had. It felt like someone was squeezing my chest, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to call back, to demand to know why. But I couldn't. I just sat there, silent, feeling like a part of me had just died. That same afternoon, trying to escape the gnawing pain in my mind, I scrolled through my phone. And then I saw it. A social media post from Cole. A photo. My whole family, the whole family, gathered around a huge birthday cake, candles glowing, bright smiles on everyone's faces. My parents, Cole. His caption read, "Happy birthday, Dad. Family is everything." I just stared at each familiar face, each joyful smile. And it felt like someone had literally stabbed me through the heart. They were celebrating, laughing, while I lay here, utterly alone, with a crushed arm and a hospital bill that was a mountain towering over me. I wasn't in that photo. I wasn't part of that joy. I'd never truly been part of that family. I turned off the phone, tossing it to the foot of the bed. The physical pain in my arm? It was nothing compared to the suffocating loneliness swallowing me whole. I didn't even cry. I just didn't have the strength left. I just sat there in that cold hospital room, listening to the rain, falling, a mournful song mirroring my life. A lifetime of trying, of shattered hopes, of cold glances from the people I called family. Memories started flooding back. You know, like when I was 5 or 6. Mom was cooking, kitchen smelling of mashed potatoes. I was there, clutching the table, hoping for praise because I'd set the dinner table so carefully. She just glanced at me, a faint smile. "Wyatt, why are you so slow? You should have finished ages ago." Her voice was sweet, but her words? Sharp, like a reminder that I was always falling short. My dad? He was all stone. Few words, but each one heavy. Never talked to me. Never asked what I liked. Just orders. "Wyatt, clean the garage. Wyatt, fix the car. Wyatt, don't waste my time." I obeyed, without question. Any delay, and his gaze could freeze a room solid. One time, I spilled a glass of water. Just water. But Dad roared like I'd committed a crime. "Foolish. Can't you do anything right?" He made me kneel in the freezing garage for 3 hours, surrounded by old boxes and the sharp smell of oil. I just trembled, not daring to cry, because that would just make him angrier. But Cole? He lived in a different universe. When he messed up, it was always brushed off. He broke Mom's favorite vase? She'd just laugh, ruffle his hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just be careful." He lost his brand new bike? Dad just shrugged, bought him another one next week. Cole was the light of that house. I was just a ghost, doing everything to avoid being noticed, to avoid being blamed. My birthdays were the ultimate proof. My 8th birthday, I remember, I was so excited, waiting for anything, a toy car, a book, even just a hug. But Mom handed me an old, faded sweater that smelled of must. "It's Cole's, but he doesn't wear it anymore. Use it for now." I took it, forcing a smile, but inside, I was empty. No cake. No candles. No celebration. Cole's birthdays? They were grand events. Balloons everywhere. Tables overflowing with sweets. My parents beaming, snapping photos of him with expensive gifts. I'd stand in a corner, pretending to be busy, but really, just trying to hide the tears in my eyes. As I got older, I kept trying to please them. I thought if I was good enough, obedient enough, hardworking enough, they'd finally see me. In high school, I wanted to play football. I dreamed of the field, the cheers, finally belonging. But Mom just gave this faint, cold laugh. "Football? That's for kids from well-off families. Wyatt, you should get a job at the auto shop. Earn some money. I didn't argue. Pointless. So, I spent my afternoons after school, hands stained with grease, while Cole went off to college, fully funded, my parents bragging to relatives that he was the pride of the family. Every time I went home, I'd fix the plumbing, mow the lawn, repaint the fence, just anything to be noticed, to hear a thank you, or see a nod of approval. But Dad stayed silent. Mom just looked at me like my efforts were just obligations. I learned to endure. To swallow the disappointment. Telling myself that one day, if I tried long enough, they'd see me. Truly see me as their son. The most painful memory? My high school graduation. I stood on the porch, diploma in hand, full of pride and hope. I'd worked so hard. But inside the house, loud music blared. Cole was throwing a party. Their laughter echoed, lights spilled into the yard. No one came out. No one asked about my diploma. No congratulations. I stood there, under the dim streetlight, my shadow long and lonely. The night air was cold, but not as cold as the loneliness crushing my heart. Now, lying here in this hospital bed, those memories just flooded back. Like a sentence passed long ago. I was never truly their son. What I called family. Just an empty shell I'd foolishly tried to fill. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my cheeks. Not for my arm. Not for the hospital bill. I was crying for a truth I'd avoided for 30 years. Maybe, in all my life, I'd never actually been loved. I opened my eyes again. The rain still falling, a steady, mournful song. In this cold room, I felt like a lost child, totally adrift. My parents abandoned me, not just today, but a long, long time ago. And I, despite trying my whole life, still hadn't found a place to call home. Days blurred after my father's brutal words, "Don't bother us." The phone sat dead at the foot of my bed, a monument to my abandonment. My arms still throbbed, but that physical pain was nothing. Just background noise to the emptiness devouring my heart. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to shut my mind off, but memories just kept crashing over me, relentless. That morning, a weak sunlight filtered through the window. The nurse came in, changed my bandages, offering gentle words I barely registered. I gritted my teeth through the pain, not wanting pity, just wanting to be left alone. Then, the door swung open. 2 men walked in. Not doctors. Not family. They had the stern, composed air that screamed, official business. One, tall with salt and pepper hair in a sharp gray suit. The other, younger, with a thin stack of documents. They introduced themselves as agents from the FBI and the Rockford Police Department. My heart slammed against my ribs. Confusion swirled. Was this about the factory accident? Workplace safety? But the older agent's eyes held something unsettling. "You're Wyatt Dempsey, correct?" he asked, his voice deep and clear. I nodded, trying to stay calm as a storm brewed inside me. They asked for my basic info, date of birth, parents' names, social security. I answered, my voice raspy from disuse. They took notes, nodded, but said nothing more. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, like something monumental was about to drop. The younger man placed his documents on the table, looked at me, and then spoke with this unnerving calm. "Mr. Wyatt, we're here to discuss an issue regarding your DNA records." DNA? My stomach dropped. I hadn't done anything wrong. My throat tightened. The older man continued. "When the hospital sent your blood sample for insurance verification, your DNA was automatically scanned through the National Identification System. And it matched the profile of a child abduction case. From over 30 years ago. In New York." The world around me just stopped. His words sounded distant, muffled, like they were coming from another dimension. Abduction? 30 years ago? New York? I shook my head, desperately grasping for a logical explanation. "You must be mistaken," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I was born here in Rockford. My parents are Carl and Lorraine Dempsey. I have nothing to do with New York." The salt and pepper agent didn't say a word. He just opened his folder, pulled out a sheet of paper, and slid it towards me. It was a black and white photo. A boy, maybe 2 years old. Big brown eyes. Curly, tousled hair. An innocent smile. I stared at that photo, and my heart seemed to freeze in my chest. That face. It was identical to my own childhood photos. The rare ones my mother kept hidden away. But this wasn't from her album. Below the photo, bold text read, Whitner Whitmore, missing son of businessman Nathaniel Whitmore and his wife Vivian Whitmore. My blood ran to ice. Whitner Whitmore, I whispered, the name foreign, yet resonating like a forgotten echo. The younger agent spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Your biological parents, Nathaniel and Vivian, submitted DNA samples years ago, never giving up hope. After nearly 3 decades, through federal database matching, your blood sample is a perfect, absolute match to their profile. I couldn't speak. My mind was a complete blank, except for one sentence, looping over and over. So, for 30 years, I've been living in a family that isn't mine. I wanted to laugh, to think this was some sick joke. But the deadly serious expressions on their faces left no room for doubt. They weren't lying. They weren't mistaken. The older man handed me another sheet, asking me to sign consent for a second DNA test. I grabbed the pen, my hand shaking so violently the ink smeared on the paper. I signed, barely knowing what I was doing, only that I needed answers. No matter how terrifying. Before they left, they handed me a business card. A lawyer representing the Whitmore family would meet me tomorrow. They've been waiting for you for a long time, the older man said, his voice softening, as if he, too, felt the crushing weight of this moment. When the door closed, I just sat there, still clutching that card. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, but I didn't hear it anymore. Nathaniel Whitmore. Vivian Whitmore. Names so alien, yet tied to me by an invisible thread I couldn't even begin to comprehend. All those years of being belittled, called useless, Carl's cold glares, Lorraine's sweet but cutting words. The family dinners where I never belonged. The birthdays without cake or gifts. All the injustice, the pain, it all coalesced now, a brutal painting of cruel truth. I didn't belong to the Dempsey family. I had never belonged to them. That business card, crumpled in my hand, felt like a burning coal. I couldn't sleep that night. The hospital sounds, the rain outside, it all just made me feel utterly lost. Who was I? Wyatt Dempsey, the machinist? Or Whitner Whitmore, a child stolen from New York? The question gnawed at me, relentless. The next morning, a sliver of weak sunlight. I was trying to eat a sandwich when the door opened. A man, maybe 50, in a sharp navy suit. His eyes were keen, not cold. He introduced himself as James Hartley, the Whitmore family's lawyer. He had this thick stack of documents, and his calm voice carried a weight that made me sit up straight. Mr. Wyatt, he began, the second DNA test has confirmed it. You are Whitner Whitmore, the long-lost son of Nathaniel and Vivian Whitmore. The match is absolute. No margin of error. He slid the documents toward me. Numbers, charts. I couldn't make sense of them. But one bolded line screamed at me. Probability of match, 99.999%. Whitner Whitmore. That was me. I still couldn't believe it. Hartley continued, Nathaniel Whitmore has been informed. He's on his way from New York. He's eager to meet you. His voice softened, as if he knew these weren't just words. They were a bomb, detonating my entire world. I just nodded, speechless. Meeting my real father. A man I never knew existed. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded. That afternoon, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't a nurse or a lawyer. It was an older man, silver streaking his hair, wearing a gray wool coat. His deep brown eyes were brimming with raw emotion. Before I could speak, he introduced himself, Nathaniel Whitmore, my biological father. He stood a few feet away, his gaze lingering, like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. I just stared back, my heart hammering. My mind a whirlwind. I wanted to call him Dad, but the word was stuck in my throat. He was still a stranger, even if his eyes seemed to say otherwise. Whitner, he whispered, his voice trembling. He moved closer, sat by my bed, his hands clasped tight as if trying to hold back a lifetime of emotion. I just looked at him, searching his face for something familiar, a clue to who I really was. All I saw were his red-rimmed eyes, reflecting a pain and a hope I couldn't fully grasp. Then, Mr. Hartley began to explain, and what he said next, it tore apart every single thing I thought I knew about my life. 30 years ago, when I, Whitmore, was 2 years old, I was kidnapped from my family's home in Albany, New York. 3 days later, the first ransom call. My parents paid, but I wasn't returned. More calls. More payments. They paid millions, clinging to the faint hope that I was still alive. The kidnappers threatened to kill me if the police were involved, so my parents acted in secrecy. When authorities finally stepped in, all traces were gone. The case became one of New York's longest-standing missing person cases. No one expected I was still alive. Then Hartley said the words that truly froze me. The FBI has identified the kidnappers. They were Carl and Lorraine Dempsey, the people you've called your parents for 30 years. My blood ran cold. Carl, the stone-faced man barking orders. Lorraine, the woman with a fake smile and disdainful glances. They had worked for the Whitmore family, Carl as a security guard, Lorraine as a housekeeper. They knew the family's routines. After taking the money, they fled New York, changed their identities, created a fake birth certificate for me, calling me Wyatt Dempsey, claiming I was born in Illinois. With those forged papers, they raised me as their own. For nearly 3 decades, no one suspecting a thing. I sat there stunned. Each word was a knife slicing into my heart. The people I called my parents, the ones who had just abandoned me in this hospital, they were the ones who had stolen me from my real family. They didn't just take my childhood, they built an entire lie to cover their crime. Every cold glance, every insult, every moment I felt like I didn't belong. It all made chilling sense now. They didn't love me because I wasn't their son. I was just a commodity. A secret. A dangerous secret they had to keep hidden. I looked at Nathaniel, my real father, sitting before me, his eyes red, but trying desperately to hold himself together. "We never stopped looking for you," he choked out. "Every day for 30 years, your mother, and I prayed you were still alive." I wanted to say something, anything, to comfort him, but the words were lodged in my throat. All I felt was a hurricane inside me. Anger, pain, and this crushing, unnamed emptiness. A few weeks later, I was finally discharged. My arm, still in a cast, ached with every movement, a constant, physical reminder of that horrific day. But at least I was out of that sterile, cold hospital room. Throughout that time, Nathaniel was just there. Every day. He arranged for a private doctor, paid all the surgery costs, never once pressured me to call him Dad. He'd just show up with coffee and a newspaper, or sit silently, sharing little stories about New York, a world I never knew. I felt his patience. He understood I needed time to process the impossible truth. I wasn't Wyatt Dempsey. I was Whitmore. But even with Nathaniel's gentle presence, the storm inside me raged. Every night, staring at the ceiling, memories of Carl and Lorraine flooded back. Carl's cold glares. Lorraine's fake smiles, their words like tiny, sharp knives. They were the ones who raised me, yes, but also the ones who stole me, making me a pawn in their monstrous lie. What was I supposed to feel? Burning anger? Crushing pain? Or just nothing? Just emptiness? One thing was crystal clear: I had to confront them. Not to forgive. Not to accuse. But to hear the truth from their own mouths. One morning, as pale sunlight spilled through the curtains, I looked at Nathaniel. "I want to see them," I said. "Carl and Lorraine. I need to hear their reasons." He met my gaze. A flicker of surprise, then a firm nod. "All right, Whiner. I'll go with you." He used my real name. And this time, I didn't correct him. I just nodded. It felt like a tiny, fragile step had been taken between us. We drove to Beloit, Wisconsin, the place I'd called home for 3 decades. The car rolled past familiar roads, golden cornfields, weathered billboards I could picture with my eyes closed. But today, everything felt alien. I wasn't Wyatt Dempsey going home. I was Whitmore, a stranger, going back to face my past. The car pulled up to that familiar two-story house. The white picket fence, a little peeling now. The wooden steps creaked. The old flower pots sat quietly on the porch, like time had stood still just for them. But as I stood before the door, a deep chill ran down my spine. Every brick, every window held memories. Not warm ones, but shadows of evenings standing on that porch, clutching a diploma no one cared about. Family dinners where I was just a ghost. Days spent desperately trying to be loved, only to receive disdain. I knocked. My heart pounded. Nathaniel stood behind me, a silent, steady anchor. The door opened, and Lorraine appeared. She froze, her eyes wide, like she'd seen a ghost. "Wyatt," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could even respond, Carl stepped out. His eyes were weary, yes, but still as cold as ever. This time, though, I didn't look away. I met their gazes. And for the very first time, I saw it. A flicker of fear. We walked into the living room. The air was so heavy, I could literally hear the wall clock ticking, each second stretching into an agonizing eternity. Nathaniel spoke first, his voice calm, but radiating authority. "I'm sure you remember me. I'm Nathaniel Whitmore, the biological father of the child you've raised for 30 years. I'm here only to hear the truth." He didn't mention the police. No threats. But his words carried a weight Carl and Lorraine couldn't ignore. They stayed silent for what felt like forever. I just sat there, looking around the room. The dining table where I'd always sat. The bookshelf where I once fixed a wobbly leg. Everything familiar, yet utterly dissolved into a dream. Finally, Carl spoke. His voice, for once, lacked that familiar hardness. "We didn't have a choice," he mumbled, staring at the floor. Nathaniel placed the stack of FBI documents on the table. Undeniable evidence. Carl looked at them, and his shoulders slumped. All strength just drained from him. He started talking. Each word like a knife, cutting into my heart. He confessed to the kidnapping, the ransom demands, the millions extorted. They'd planned it all meticulously, using their knowledge of the Whitmore family. After taking the money, they fled, changed identities, forged a birth certificate for Wyatt Dempsey in Illinois. Lorraine started to cry, her sobs breaking the terrible silence. She mumbled that at first, she kept me out of fear, worried Carl would be exposed. But over time, every time she looked at me, she saw her guilt. A guilt too heavy to bear. So, to cope, she became cold, controlling, disdainful. As if blaming me would ease her pain. Carl was different. To him, I was living proof of their crime. A dangerous liability he had to keep hidden until his dying day. I listened, but it felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Each word they spoke peeled back layers of my childhood memories, revealing this raw, agonizing truth. I was just a tool. A secret. A lie. I looked around the house again, everything familiar, yet now utterly foreign. I stood up, my voice low and resolute. "If you had ever truly loved me, you would have told me the truth long ago. Instead, you let me live in a lie." Lorraine burst into deeper sobs, trying to step closer, but I instinctively backed away. Carl just bowed his head, avoiding Nathaniel's gaze. Nathaniel stood behind me silent, but his eyes spoke volumes. The pain of 3 decades of waiting, of loss, and finally finding his son again. The conversation dragged on, thick with tension. Each word, each agonizing silence, cutting deeper into the past of the 4 people in that room. The air was so heavy, I swear the entire world was holding its breath. The ticking of that wall clock amplified the suffocating tension in the room. I looked at Carl and Lorraine, the people I once called parents, and felt this vast, unbridgeable chasm between us. They weren't my parents. They were the ones who stole me, who made me a living part of their 30-year lie. I wanted to ask more, to understand how they could be so utterly cruel. But before I could speak, a sharp screech of tires ripped through the air outside. Then, flashing red and blue lights streamed through the window, painting eerie shadows across the living room walls. Carl flashed. His eyes, for the first time, were filled with pure, raw panic. His usual hardness just crumbled. Lorraine's face went white. Her hands clutched the hem of her shirt, like she was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. I stood there silent. But deep down I knew. This moment was inevitable. Nathaniel stood behind me, calm, his gaze steady, but I could feel his unwavering resolve. He had waited too long for this day. Federal agents burst through the door. A sharp command echoed from the front yard. The flashing police lights flooded the room, illuminating the faces of the 4 people inside. 2 criminals. A father who had waited 30 years. And me, a son whose childhood had been brutally stolen. I looked at Lorraine. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, I felt nothing. No anger. No pity. Just a cold, empty void in my chest. 3 FBI agents, 2 in black jackets, one holding a thick file, stepped into the living room. They ordered everyone to stay put. Their voices left no room for argument. Carl stood frozen, his hands hanging limp, as if all his will had just drained away. Lorraine collapsed into a chair, her trembling hands covering her face, her sobs choked and broken. An agent began to read the arrest warrant, his voice steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. Carl Dempsey, Lorraine Dempsey, you are under arrest for kidnapping, interstate extortion, and identity fraud. I stood there, silent, watching as Carl and Lorraine were handcuffed right before my eyes. Lorraine sobbed, her eyes searching mine, desperate, pleading for a shred of sympathy. But I couldn't respond. I just looked at them. The people who taught me how to hold a hammer. Who cooked my dinners. Who were once everything I called family. Now, they were criminals, being led away under the flashing red and blue lights. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel sorrow. Just this profound void, as if a part of me had been utterly erased. Nathaniel and I were asked to go to the nearby FBI field office to assist with the investigation. In that stark interrogation room, the agents laid out the undeniable evidence: bank records of multi-million-dollar transactions, forged identities, photos of Carl and Lorraine from 30 years ago, a meticulous timeline of the extortion demands. Everything aligned perfectly with the old case files. I sat there, listening to every detail, feeling like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Not mine. Not Whitmore's. Carl remained silent, his eyes vacant, as if he'd already accepted his fate. Lorraine was different. She claimed she only followed her husband's lead, that things had gone too far. Her voice trembled, but I didn't want to hear it. Her excuses couldn't change the truth. They had stolen me, built a life on lies, abandoned me when I needed them most. The investigators confirmed Carl and Lorraine would be prosecuted in New York. Life in prison for Carl. 30 years for Lorraine. I listened, but said nothing. I just desperately wanted to leave that room. To escape the evidence, the confessions, the crushing weight of those memories. In the hallway, I sank onto a wooden bench, staring out a glass window. The red and blue police lights still flashed, reflecting on my face, bright and blurred. What was I supposed to feel? Relief? Grief? Just emptiness? The man who taught me how to hold a hammer, the woman who cooked my dinners, they were being led away as criminals. Despite their cruelty, their selfishness, deep down, they were still woven into the fabric of my memories. Watching them go, it hurt more than I ever expected. Nathaniel sat beside me silent, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. He understood. He knew I'd lost both worlds, past and present, in a single day. He'd found me after 30 years, yes, but he knew the wound inside me wasn't just about my identity. It was about trust. He quietly told the investigator he would handle all legal proceedings. He didn't want to put more pressure on me. I looked at him, gratitude mingling with a profound sense of unfamiliarity. He was my father, but I still didn't know how to call him that. After Carl and Lorraine's arrest, the country exploded with my story. Every news channel, every newspaper screamed the headlines. 30-year-old kidnapping case finally closed. Wyatt Dempsey vanished, replaced by Whitmore. It felt like I was stepping into a brand new identity. But every line, every article was a knife. A brutal reminder of the years stolen from me. Nathaniel stayed in Bloit, got a hotel room. He didn't pressure me to move to New York or to call him Dad. He just stayed. Every morning, he'd bring coffee, a sandwich, and we'd just eat breakfast in silence. Sometimes, he'd talk about Albany streets, the golden autumn leaves, fishing trips with his own father. I listened. I nodded. But inside, that emptiness lingered. We were two strangers, trying to get to know each other after 3 decades. One afternoon, as the sunset painted the small street outside the hotel in gold, Nathaniel looked at me, his eyes gentle but so meaningful. "Do you want to go to New York?" he asked, his voice soft as a breeze. "Your mother and sister are still waiting." I stared out the window, watching dry leaves swirl on the sidewalk. New York. The Whitmore family. It all felt so foreign. But deep down, I knew. I had to face it. Not just them, but myself. Finally, I nodded. "I want to meet them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Nathaniel smiled. A faint, warm smile. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a brief touch, but enough to feel that colossal gap between us slowly closing. 2 days later, we were on a flight to Albany. A car picked us up, driving through tree-lined streets to the Whitmore estate, the very place where I'd been stolen 30 years ago. As I looked out the window at the tall oaks and old-fashioned houses, it felt both unfamiliar and strangely, profoundly familiar. Like I was traveling back in time. The iron gate opened. A grand old house appeared, dark tiled roof, ivy-covered walls. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy. Nathaniel walked beside me, silent, but his eyes guided me. Then the front door opened, and Vivian Whitmore, my biological mother, stepped onto the porch. She froze, her eyes wide, disbelieving. For a moment, time simply ceased. I looked at her, saw Nathaniel's brown eyes reflected in hers, the lines of years etched on her face. And then, the tears came. She rushed forward, engulfing me in a hug. I stood rigid, unsure what to do. But then I tightened my arms around her, hugging her back. We just cried, unable to stop. She touched my face, her fingers trembling, as if trying to memorize every feature to make up for every lost year. "Weiner," she choked out. "My son." For the first time in my entire life, I felt the true warmth of family. Something I'd never, ever known in 30 years. Nathaniel stood nearby, silent tears streaming down his own cheeks. After 3 decades of searching, he was finally watching his wife embrace their son. Then, from the staircase, another woman descended. Violet Whitmore, my biological sister. She stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes hesitant. Then she stepped forward, wordlessly, placing a hand on my bandaged arm, and she just burst into tears. I nodded, my lips quivering. The feeling of both familiarity and this immense distance made my heart ache. We hugged. 2 siblings reunited after 30 years, yet separated by a gap time couldn't truly measure. Inside, in the living room, I saw family photos everywhere, old keepsakes, preserved like treasures. Vivian, her voice still breaking, told me she had never, ever cleared out the boys' room. "Every week," she said, "I cleaned it. As if you might come back any moment." She led me upstairs, opened a door, and inside I saw it. A small wooden toy car, a green wool blanket, an old family photo on the table. I sank to my knees, touching the toy, feeling like I was touching a piece of my stolen childhood. Tears streamed down my face, too fast to wipe away. That evening, we had our first meal together in 30 years. No music, no fanfare. Just a simple dinner. Candlelight flickering. Tear-filled eyes. I didn't say much. Just listened quietly to Violet's laughter, Vivian's stories, Nathaniel's warm, steady voice. I tried to etch every single moment into my memory, afraid that if I closed my eyes, it would all vanish like a dream. At the end of the meal, Vivian gripped my hand tightly. "Nothing can make up for the years we lost," she said, her voice trembling. "But we'll spend the rest of our lives trying." Nathaniel looked at us, his eyes shining, tinged with a deep sorrow. I nodded slightly, unable to speak. The pain inside me hadn't vanished. But for the first time, I felt I truly, finally, had a place to call home. The trial of Carl and Lorraine Dempsey became a national sensation. TV broadcasts, front-page articles, all screaming the same thing. 30-year-old kidnapping case finally closed. Wyatt Dempsey vanished, replaced by Whitmore. It felt like I was stepping into a brand new identity. But every line, every article was a knife. A brutal reminder of the years stolen from me. The case moved to federal court in New York, where it all began. I was invited to attend as a victim, but I didn't want to stand at a podium to recount my story for the world. I sat silently in the gallery, my gaze empty, feeling neither hatred nor pity. Carl and Lorraine sat a few meters away, but it felt like they belonged to an entirely different universe. Carl, silver-haired, weathered, kept his head bowed throughout. Lorraine, eyes swollen, constantly wiping away tears. I looked at them, but felt nothing. No anger. No sorrow. Just this profound, unnameable void. The court revealed the investigation's findings. Carl was the mastermind, orchestrating ransom calls, siphoning over $10 million through fake accounts. Lorraine was his accomplice, helping conceal the crime, raising me under a false identity for 30 years. They were charged with kidnapping, interstate extortion, identity fraud, and obstruction of justice. After 3 months, the verdict came down. Carl, life imprisonment, no parole. Lorraine, 30 years, with a possibility of reduction if she cooperated. When the verdict was read, Lorraine's sobs echoed through the silent courtroom. Carl just bowed his head, his eyes empty, as if he'd accepted his fate long ago. I left before the crowd could rise. I couldn't look at them anymore. Not out of hatred, but because the pain was just too much. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved in my face, questions pouring like rain. How do you feel about the conviction? Can you forgive them? I paused, took a deep breath, and said the only thing that felt true. I don't hate them anymore. I just want to live as my true self. Then I walked away, leaving the flashing cameras and the noise behind me. I returned to Albany with Nathaniel and Vivian. They offered for me to stay at the Whitmore estate, but I chose a small apartment near the city center. I needed time. Time to adjust, to find myself amidst the ruins of my past. My new apartment wasn't much different from my old one in Rockford. Small, simple, a window overlooking a noisy street. But here, I felt lighter. Like each breath was a chance to start over. On Nathaniel's advice, I started therapy. My therapist suggested I write down my memories as a way to heal. I spent hours at the kitchen table, piecing together fragmented moments. The years in Bloit, Carl's cold glares, Lorraine's fake smiles, and then the first warm moments with the Whitmore family. Each word was a knife, yes, but also a vital step toward letting go. Even though I inherited a substantial fortune from the Whitmore family, I chose to live as I always had. Driving my own car, cooking my own meals, working as a technical consultant at a local machine shop. I didn't use the Whitmore name for special treatment. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, just as I had for 30 years. On weekends, I'd go to the estate for dinner. Vivian's Sunday meals were always lavish, the scent of fresh bread and stewed meat filling the house. Violet would share stories of her childhood, growing up with the shadow of a lost brother, how she'd look into my old room, imagining I was still there. Nathaniel told me about the family business, not pressuring me to take over, but wanting me to understand our legacy. I listened. I nodded. And slowly, a connection grew, one I'd never experienced before. That night, I sat on the porch of my new apartment, watching the city lights shimmer, reflected in my steaming coffee. My life had come full circle, from darkness to light. I knew I'd never forget what I'd lost, the stolen years, the buried pain. But I also understood that justice wasn't just a verdict in a courtroom. Justice was the chance to live again, as my true self. Whitmore. No longer anyone's shadow. In the days that followed, I slowly began to learn how to breathe again. To slow down. To embrace the quiet. You know, after 30 years of running from a past I didn't even know was mine, the hardest thing wasn't forgiving Carl and Lorraine. It was learning to forgive myself. One tranquil autumn evening, I sat in my small Albany apartment, a notebook from my therapist open before me. She told me to write down my true feelings to heal. My tea went cold. The streetlight outside cast a soft glow on the blank page. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the pen and began to write. I lived 30 years in a story that wasn't mine, I wrote. But perhaps that's what taught me the true meaning of freedom. Memories flooded back, sharp and vivid, like an old film. The roar of the steel press. The searing pain in my arm. Lying in that cold hospital room with a silent phone, no calls coming. Carl's cold glares. Lorraine's fake smiles. And then, the moment Nathaniel first hugged me, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Whiner." Each memory was a cut, a wound, yes, but also a piece of a puzzle, helping me understand that life, no matter how brutal, always leaves a door open. You just need the courage to step through it. I kept writing, every line pouring from my heart. Justice to me wasn't just watching Carl and Lorraine be punished. Justice was no longer letting them control my emotions. I chose to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Hatred, I realized, is an invisible chain, binding you to the very past you desperately want to escape. Sometimes, the only way to be truly free is to let it go. I let go. Not to forget, no, but to move forward. To stop carrying the suffocating weight of those stolen years. In that notebook, I wrote about family. About how it's not just where you're born, but where you choose to belong. I once thought I had no one, that I was just a lonely shadow in Carl and Lorraine's house. But with Nathaniel, Vivian, and Violet, I finally understood. Family isn't just blood. It's in the way they opened their hearts to me. The way they patiently walked through my pain with me. Vivian didn't try to erase my past. She held my hand, guiding me through the raw wounds. Nathaniel didn't push me to become an heir. He just wanted me to know I always had a home. Violet, with her childhood stories, showed me I was never truly forgotten, even when I didn't know they existed. Later, a reporter asked me how I wanted to be remembered. I looked into the camera and said, I don't want to be remembered as a kidnapping victim. I want to be remembered as a man who chose to stand up, to live honestly and kindly, even when the world had lied to him. Those weren't just words for a soundbite. They were a promise to myself. I respectfully declined Nathaniel's offer of an executive role in his company. Instead, I chose to work as a community advisor for the Whitmore Foundation, helping missing children and victims of domestic violence. For me, helping them find themselves was the best way to truly heal myself. One day, I was invited to speak at a local university. Standing before hundreds of young, hopeful faces, I told them, sometimes, we can't choose where we come from, but we can always choose how we live afterward. I shared my journey not to boast, but to show them that life, however harsh, always has a path to escape. I urged them to cherish the simple things, a home, a warm meal, someone willing to listen. Because those were the things I'd lost for 30 years. And I emphasized, don't let your past define you. It's where you came from, not where you have to stay. As dawn broke, painting the sky in fiery colors, I closed the notebook. I stepped onto my balcony, feeling the cool, late autumn breeze. The radiant sunrise filtered through the trees, like the light I once thought I'd never see again. I took a deep breath. And for the very first time, I felt truly lighter. I was no longer the stolen child. No longer Wyatt Dempsey, living a lie. I was Whitmore. A man who had found himself amidst the shattered fragments of his past. Standing there, watching the first vibrant, warm rays pierce through the trees, I reflected on my life. After 30 long years, it had taught me that justice isn't just a courtroom verdict. It's the truth laid bare, no matter how painful. Love isn't just blood ties, but the way people choose to stay, to hold hands through the deepest wounds. And happiness? Sometimes, it isn't about reclaiming what was lost, but learning to cherish what remains. A home. A meal. A sincere glance. I, Whitmore, had found light among the broken pieces. And I knew, with enough courage, anyone could do the same.